The afternoon sun fell softly across the glass windows of the city mall, making everything inside shine a little brighter. The mall was crowded, filled with laughter, chatter, and the sound of people walking fast. Near the entrance of a popular boutique, two young police officers stood watching the flow of people. They had been called there for a suspected theft. The report said a woman had taken an expensive watch without paying. She matched the description. Tall, confident, wearing a neat gray coat and carrying a leather handbag. The woman walked calmly out of the store, her steps steady. The store manager pointed her out quietly to the officers. Without hesitation, they approached her. One officer called out politely, asking her to stop. She turned, a little confused but not alarmed. Her face was calm, her eyes steady. She looked like someone who didn't have a reason to be nervous. "Ma'am, could we talk to you for a second?" the officer asked. She nodded, her expression still composed. "We received a report about a missing item from this store," he continued. "Do you mind showing us your receipt?" The woman opened her handbag, looking through it carefully. She seemed to be taking her time, not rushing. Then she frowned slightly. "It seems I don't have it with me. I must have left it at the counter," she said in a calm voice. The officers exchanged quick looks. The store manager crossed her arms, whispering something to one of them, nodding toward the woman's bag. The young officer felt his heartbeat quicken. He had only been in the force for a few months, and this was the first time he had a possible arrest right in front of him. He wanted to do everything by the book. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we'll have to take you in for questioning," he said, trying to sound professional. The woman raised her eyebrows slightly, surprised but not angry. "You believe I stole something?" she asked softly. "We just need to clear it up," he replied quickly. "Please turn around." The woman sighed and did as told. The officer gently placed the handcuffs on her wrists. People nearby began to notice what was happening. A few stopped and took out their phones, recording. Others whispered, curious and a little shocked. The sight of a well-dressed woman being arrested in broad daylight caught everyone's attention. As they walked her out of the store, the second officer noticed something odd. The woman didn't seem scared. She didn't shout, didn't resist, and didn't try to explain herself loudly like most suspects did. Instead, she looked thoughtful, almost as if she felt sorry for them. It was strange enough to make him uncomfortable. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly, her tone gentle. The officer leading her didn't respond. He was too focused on doing everything properly, afraid of missing a step. But the words stayed in his mind. He glanced at his partner, who looked unsure now. "Should we check her bag again before taking her in?" his partner asked softly. "We'll handle it at the station," he replied firmly. Outside, the sunlight hit their faces as they led her to the patrol car. The woman looked around calmly, noticing the people watching, some shaking their heads, others whispering. She didn't seem angry about the attention. She almost looked amused, like she knew something they didn't. When they reached the car, she turned to the younger officer. "Could you check my wallet? You'll find something that will explain everything," she said. He hesitated. His partner shook his head slightly, signaling him not to fall for it. "We can do that later," he said, guiding her into the car. She didn't resist. She just looked out the window as the car started moving. The ride to the precinct was quiet. The younger officer couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The woman didn't act like someone guilty. Usually, people in her position would argue, cry, or try to prove their innocence. But she just sat there, hands cuffed, staring at the city passing by, her face calm and unreadable. He tried to make small talk, maybe to ease his own nerves. "You said we're making a mistake." "You mean about the theft?" She turned her head slightly, a small smile touching her lips. "You'll understand soon enough," she replied. He didn't know how to respond. There was something about her tone, not smug, not angry, but confident. It made him second-guess everything. He looked at his partner, who was driving with a tense jaw, pretending not to hear. When they arrived at the precinct, the woman stepped out gracefully. Her calmness made everyone around her pause for a second. The officers at the desk watched as she was escorted in. The younger officer could feel eyes on them, whispers starting. He began to doubt himself. What if she really hadn't stolen anything? They brought her to an interview room. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly. The room was simple, a table, 3 chairs, and a camera in the corner. The woman sat down, crossing her legs neatly, still wearing that calm expression. The younger officer took a deep breath and began the routine questions. Name, address, date of birth. She answered each one clearly without hesitation. Everything she said sounded genuine. Still, procedure required them to check her belongings. When the officer opened her handbag, he saw nothing unusual: a phone, keys, some receipts, and a wallet. He picked up the wallet and opened it. That's when his eyes widened. Inside, neatly tucked behind a few cards, was a shining metal badge. He blinked, thinking he must be imagining it. But it was real. He looked at the name on it, then back at the woman sitting in front of him. Her calm smile grew just a little wider. "Now do you understand?" she asked quietly. He swallowed hard and turned the badge toward his partner, who froze. The badge wasn't just any badge. It belonged to their own department. The name matched one from the weekly bulletin, a high-ranking officer who was supposed to join their team soon. Their new captain. The room fell silent. The younger officer's hands trembled slightly as the realization sank in. They had just handcuffed their new commanding officer and brought her in like a criminal. He stood frozen, unsure what to say. The woman, no, the captain, looked at them kindly. "It happens," she said softly. "You were doing your job." His face turned pale. He wanted to apologize, to explain that they were just following protocol, but no words came out. His partner looked equally horrified. The mistake was unbelievable. Within minutes, word spread through the precinct. Other officers peeked through the glass window, whispering in shock. The captain leaned back in her chair, still calm, as if she had already forgiven them. She explained that she had been shopping after attending an undercover meeting and had accidentally left her receipt on the counter. When the store manager couldn't find proof of payment, she became the prime suspect. She didn't blame the officers for doing their job. If anything, she respected that they followed the rules, even when it led to an awkward outcome. Still, the embarrassment in the room was heavy. The younger officer wished he could disappear. His partner ran a hand over his face, muttering under his breath. They both knew this would be talked about for a long time. The captain finally asked them to remove the handcuffs, which they did quickly. Her wrists were slightly red, but she didn't complain. She simply looked at them and said, "Next time, remember that appearance isn't proof. Stay observant, but also listen. Sometimes people tell the truth the first time." The younger officer nodded, still too embarrassed to speak. She smiled again, that same calm smile she had from the start. It wasn't mockery, it was kindness. Somehow that made him feel even smaller. When the captain left the room, the entire station stood silent. No one could believe what had just happened. The chief arrived shortly after, looking furious at first. But when he saw the captain's composed expression, he simply sighed. Mistakes happen, but this one would serve as a lesson for everyone. The younger officer sat quietly in his chair long after she left, thinking about how easily things could go wrong when assumptions took control. He had wanted to do his job well, to prove himself, but instead he had learned a more important lesson: humility. Outside, the sun was setting, turning the sky orange and pink. The mall incident had ended, but the memory of that day would stay with him forever. The moment he put handcuffs on a woman who turned out to be his own superior would be a story retold in every break room for years to come. And somewhere deep down, despite the embarrassment, he was grateful. Because that mistake taught him more about being a good officer than any training ever could. The next morning, the police station was unusually quiet. Everyone knew what had happened the previous day, and no one wanted to be the first to talk about it. The two young officers who had arrested their new captain came in early, hoping to avoid too much attention. But whispers followed them everywhere. It was impossible to hide something like that in a place where gossip spread faster than radio news. The younger officer hadn't slept much the night before. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her calm face, the faint smile, the way she said, "You're making a mistake." He felt a heavy mix of guilt and embarrassment. He had done everything by the book, but still, it felt like he'd failed. The memory of snapping the handcuffs around her wrists replayed in his head again and again. When the clock struck 9, the chief called him and his partner into the briefing room. The moment they entered, they saw her, the captain, standing beside the chief. She looked different today, dressed in uniform, her posture straight and confident. The badge on her chest shone under the lights, the same badge he had seen in her wallet. For a moment, his heart sank all over again. "Good morning," she said simply. Her voice was calm, steady. Please have a seat." They sat down, avoiding her eyes. The chief didn't look angry, just serious. "Captain Hayes has decided she wants to handle this situation personally," he said. "She believes there's a lesson here worth sharing." Then he nodded to her and stepped aside. The captain looked at the two officers. "Yesterday was unexpected," she began, her tone even. "But it showed me something important. You followed procedure. You acted fast. You didn't ignore a report. That's good. That's what the badge stands for. But what we need to learn from it is that doing your job is more than just following the rules. It's about reading the situation, about using your instincts." The younger officer swallowed hard. He wanted to say something, to apologize again, but she lifted her hand slightly, stopping him. "You don't need to explain," she said softly. "I've been in your shoes before. We all make mistakes. What matters is what you do after them." Her tone wasn't angry. If anything, it sounded like she understood. That surprised him. Most people in her position would have demanded punishment or made it a big deal. But she didn't. Instead, she wanted to turn it into something meaningful. She continued, "I'm taking command of this precinct starting today, and I want both of you on my team." The officers looked at each other in disbelief. She could have easily transferred them or written a report that would stain their records. But instead, she wanted to work with them. The younger officer finally found the courage to speak. "Ma'am, we didn't mean to—" "I know," she interrupted gently, "and I don't hold it against you, but I expect you to learn from it. That's how we get better." Her words stayed with them long after the meeting ended. Later that day, the captain gathered the whole department for a short meeting. She stood at the front of the room, confident but approachable. "I want to share something personal," she said. "Yesterday, 2 of our officers arrested me. Yes, it was a mistake, but it was also a reminder. We often look at people and assume things. We judge before we understand. Out there on the streets, that can lead to serious consequences." Everyone listened closely. Some tried to hide smiles. Others shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to laugh or feel bad. The story had spread fast, but hearing her talk about it with such calmness made people respect her even more. She finished her speech with one simple sentence: "Let's be sure that when we act with reason, not just reaction." After the meeting, life at the station slowly returned to normal, but the atmosphere felt different. There was a quiet respect for the new captain. She didn't shout to prove her authority. She didn't use power to make others fear her. Instead, she carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that made people want to do better. A few days later, she called the younger officer into her office. Her desk was neat, with a small photo frame and a mug of coffee beside it. The smell of paper and coffee filled the air. "Sit," she said kindly. He obeyed, still nervous. He didn't know why she had called him in. "I've read your record," she said. "You're smart, quick, and careful. You remind me of myself when I started, but you hesitate too much. You second-guess yourself. Yesterday showed that." He nodded slowly. "I didn't want to make a mistake, ma'am." "And that's why you made one," she replied, her tone patient. "Sometimes doing the right thing means trusting yourself. If you had looked closer, you would have seen the badge in my wallet. You hesitated because you didn't trust your instincts." Her words weren't harsh, but they cut deep. He realized she was right. He had been so afraid of doing something wrong that he forgot to think beyond the rules. "I want you to train with me for the next few weeks," she said suddenly. "You'll ride with me on patrol, observe and learn. Think of it as a second chance." He was shocked. "Ride with you, ma'am?" She smiled. "Yes. Don't worry, I'll leave my badge visible this time." For the first time since the incident, he laughed. It broke the tension in the room, and she smiled too. That moment changed everything. From then on, he started seeing her not just as a superior, but as a mentor. The next few weeks were intense but eye-opening. Riding with the captain was different from anything he had experienced before. She didn't talk much, but when she did, every word carried weight. She noticed things no one else did. A nervous glance, a car parked slightly off, a small sound in a quiet alley. Her instincts were sharp, but her compassion was even sharper. One afternoon, they got a call about a young boy reported missing near a park. It was a hot day, the kind that made tempers short and patience thinner. When they arrived, the boy's mother was crying, surrounded by officers who were already searching the area. The captain didn't rush into action like the others. Instead, she spoke softly to the mother, asking calm, precise questions. Where did you last see him? Did he have a favorite spot? Was he upset before he left? The woman pointed toward the far end of the park, near a cluster of trees. The captain motioned for the young officer to follow. They searched quietly, scanning the area. After a few minutes, the captain stopped. She crouched near a bench, noticing a small toy car half buried in the dirt. He was here, she said. But look, there are no footprints leading away. He didn't walk off alone. The officer frowned. Then where? Before he could finish, the captain pointed toward a narrow path leading behind the park maintenance shed. They followed it carefully, and soon they heard a faint sound, a soft sob. The boy was sitting behind the shed, scared but unharmed. The captain knelt beside him, speaking gently until he stopped crying. When they brought the boy back to his mother, she burst into tears of relief. The captain didn't take credit or make a big deal about it. She simply said, "Next time we start by listening." That night, as they drove back, the young officer couldn't help but say, "You make it look easy." "It's not," she replied quietly. "It's just about slowing down enough to see what's really there." Her words stayed with him long after. He realized being a good officer wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about helping people, understanding them, and protecting them with respect. A few days later, when they returned to the station, the captain stopped at the entrance and looked at him. "You've learned a lot these past weeks," she said. "Remember this. The uniform gives you power, but it's your choices that earn respect." He nodded, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. The woman he had once mistaken for a criminal had become the person who taught him what the badge truly meant. From that day forward, he carried himself differently, not with arrogance, but with purpose. And every time he saw the captain walk past, calm, firm, and respected by all, he remembered that moment in the mall, the mistake that turned into the most important lesson of his career. Sometimes life teaches through embarrassment, sometimes through failure. But if one listens carefully, those moments become the turning points that shape who we are. And for him, that day when he put handcuffs on his own captain was the start of becoming the kind of officer she had always been. Strong, fair, and quietly brave. The morning began quietly at the precinct, with the hum of printers and the steady tapping of keyboards filling the air. The younger officer arrived early again, just as he had since he started training under the captain. Something about working with her made him feel more focused, more determined to get things right. Every day with her brought something new, a lesson, a story, or an unexpected turn that taught him more about life than the job itself. It had been 3 weeks since the day they brought in the missing boy from the park. The story had reached almost every corner of the department, but the captain had never once taken credit for it. She said the boy was found because of teamwork, because they had listened. That humility was what made people respect her even more. The officer admired that most about her. She led not by raising her voice, but by example. That morning, she called him into her office again. Her door was half open, sunlight streaming across her desk. She was reading a report, her expression serious but calm. When she looked up, she gave a small nod for him to enter. "You're improving," she said. "I've been watching how you handle calls. You're learning to trust yourself, that's good." He smiled slightly. "I learned from the best, ma'am." She gave a small chuckle. "Don't flatter me yet. There's still a lot more to learn." Before he could respond, her phone buzzed. She answered quickly, her tone shifting from relaxed to focused. "Understood, we're on our way." She hung up and grabbed her jacket. "Let's go. There's been a break-in at a small grocery on Elm Street. Owner says the suspect might still be inside." They hurried to the patrol car. The city morning was busy as usual, with traffic horns and chatter in the air. The officer drove while she watched out the window, scanning everything. Her focus never wavered. Even in silence, her presence carried calm authority. When they arrived at the grocery store, the front door was slightly open, the glass cracked. The owner, an older man with trembling hands, stood outside, his voice shaky as he explained what happened. "I came in to open up and I heard something in the back," he said. "Then I saw a shadow move. I ran out and called you." The captain nodded calmly. "You did the right thing. Stay here." She motioned for the younger officer to follow her inside. They moved carefully, step by step, their flashlights cutting through the dim light of the small store. The shelves were half-stocked, a few boxes scattered on the floor. In the back, they heard faint movement. Someone was there. The officer's hand went instinctively to his holster, but the captain held up a hand, signaling him to wait. She moved closer to the sound, her voice steady but gentle. "This is the police. If you're in here, come out slowly. No one needs to get hurt." For a few seconds, there was silence. Then, from behind a stack of boxes, a figure appeared. It was a teenager, maybe 15 or 16, with dirt on his face and torn clothes. His hands were shaking as he looked at them. The officer could see fear in his eyes, not defiance. "Please don't arrest me," the boy whispered. "I just needed food." The younger officer felt his heart sink. The boy looked hungry, desperate. He didn't look like a criminal. The captain lowered her flashlight slightly, her tone softening. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated. "I don't want to say." "You'll take me away." "We just want to understand," she said. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head. The boy's stomach growled quietly, and his eyes darted toward a loaf of bread lying near him. The captain noticed. "You're hungry," she said simply. He nodded, embarrassed. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the captain turned to the officer. "Go tell the owner to come in." The officer hesitated, unsure what she planned, but he obeyed. A minute later, the old man came inside, looking nervous. When he saw the boy, his expression hardened. "That's the one. He broke in. I want him arrested." The captain held up her hand calmly. "Sir, let's talk for a moment. Nothing was stolen. He didn't damage anything except the lock. He's just hungry. Maybe we can handle this differently." The store owner frowned. "He broke my door." "And you have every right to be upset," she replied. "But maybe this is a chance to do something better. Would you be willing to let him work for you for a few days to make up for it instead of pressing charges?" The man blinked, surprised. "Work for me?" "Yes," she said. "He needs food, not a record. You could use some help, I'm sure. And maybe this way everyone wins." There was a long pause. The old man looked at the boy, then at her. Finally, his shoulders relaxed. "All right," he said slowly. "But he cleans every shelf." The boy looked up, eyes wide with relief. "I will, I promise." The captain smiled slightly. Then it settled. They left the store quietly after helping the owner fix the lock. As they walked back to the car, the officer shook his head in amazement. "I never would have thought of that," he admitted. The captain glanced at him. "Justice doesn't always mean punishment," she said. "Sometimes it means giving someone a chance to make things right." Her words stayed in his mind as they drove away. He thought about how easy it was to assume the worst, to label someone without understanding their story. The captain never rushed to judgment. She always looked for the human side first. Later that afternoon, back at the station, she gathered a few officers for a short debrief. She told them what happened but focused on the outcome, not the mistake. "The goal isn't just to enforce laws," she said. "It's to build trust. People remember kindness longer than punishment." That day changed something in the young officer. He began to see his badge differently, not just as a symbol of authority, but as a reminder of responsibility. Weeks passed, and he grew more confident. The captain noticed. She gave him more independence, letting him take the lead during calls. One evening, as they drove through the city, the orange glow of sunset reflected off the buildings. The air felt calm, almost peaceful. "You're doing well," she said suddenly. "When I first met you, you doubted yourself. Now you act with purpose." He smiled modestly. "I had good guidance." She turned slightly toward him, her eyes soft but serious. "Just remember, the world will test you. Not everyone will deserve kindness. But it's not about who deserves it, it's about who needs it." He nodded, taking in every word. It wasn't the kind of advice found in manuals or training videos. It came from experience, from someone who had seen both sides of life. A few nights later, a call came in about a domestic disturbance at a nearby apartment. When they arrived, the building was quiet except for the sound of muffled crying. The door to one of the units was half open. Inside, A woman sat on the floor, her face buried in her hands, while a man stood near the kitchen, pacing. The officer moved to step in, but the captain gestured for him to wait. She spoke first, her tone soft but firm. "Everyone okay in here?" The man looked up, startled. "We were just arguing. Nothing serious." The captain nodded, glancing around. The place was small but clean. The woman didn't speak, just kept crying quietly. The captain crouched down beside her. "Do you feel safe right now?" she asked gently. The woman hesitated, then whispered, "I just need some space." "We can help with that," the captain said. She looked at the man. "Why don't you step outside for a few minutes?" He frowned but obeyed. Once he was gone, the captain handed the woman a tissue. "You don't have to tell me everything," she said quietly. "But I need to know you're safe. Do you have somewhere to go?" The woman nodded slowly. "My sister's place." "Good. We'll take you there," the captain said. As they drove the woman across town, the officer couldn't help but admire how the captain handled things with empathy, not force. She treated people like people, not problems. When they dropped the woman off, she turned to the captain and said softly, "Thank you. You're the first officer who didn't make me feel small." The captain smiled. That's how it should always be. Later that night, as they returned to the station, the younger officer looked out the window, thinking about all he had seen. Every situation they faced had shown him something new. That strength didn't always mean power, and that real leadership came from compassion. Before they called it a night, the captain stopped by her office. She turned to him before going inside. "You handled yourself well today," she said. "Keep that heart. Don't lose it to the badge." He nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. As the days passed, their partnership grew stronger. The station began to change too. The captain's way of handling things started spreading. Officers spoke more politely to people, listened more, acted slower, and thought deeper. The air in the precinct felt different, warmer, more human. And though the younger officer still remembered the embarrassment of that first day when he handcuffed her, he now understood that everything had happened for a reason. That one mistake had become the beginning of his real training, not just as a police officer, but as a person. The station was buzzing with quiet tension after the arrest. Word had spread quickly that something unusual had happened, but no one yet knew what it was. The two young officers sat on a wooden bench in the hallway, glancing nervously at each other. Their hands fidgeted and neither of them spoke for a long time. The air felt heavy, thick with a sense of regret. They had done what they thought was right. They had followed the book, or at least they believed they had. But now doubts crept in. Inside one of the small rooms, the woman sat calmly at the table. Her hands, still slightly red from the cuffs, rested in her lap. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even impatient. She looked like someone waiting for a delayed train, quiet, composed, and oddly understanding. One of the senior officers peeked through the glass window in the door, then stepped back with a shocked expression. He whispered something to another officer, and soon whispers filled the hallway. The chief walked in, holding a file in his hand. His face was firm but controlled. When he entered the room, the two young officers followed behind him, their faces pale. The woman looked up and nodded politely, almost like she was greeting an old friend. The chief took a slow breath before speaking. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said carefully. He placed the file on the table and opened it. Inside was her identification, her credentials, and a shiny police badge that glinted under the fluorescent lights. The young officers looked down and froze. The badge had the same emblem they wore on their uniforms. The woman spoke softly, her voice calm and steady. "I tried to tell them," she said. "But they were doing their job. I respect that." Her words were kind, but they cut deep. The officers felt a sting of guilt. They had treated her like any suspect without realizing who she really was. The chief sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Captain Hayes," he said, using her name with quiet respect. "I don't think we need to tell you how sorry we are." She smiled faintly. "Please," she replied. "There's no need for titles right now. Let's just talk about what happened." The young officers could barely look at her. They mumbled apologies, their voices shaky. One of them said, "We didn't mean any disrespect, ma'am. We just wanted to do the right thing." "I know," she said gently. "And that's what makes it worth talking about." The room was silent for a moment. The chief left them to speak privately. When the door closed, the woman leaned forward slightly. She wasn't lecturing them. She was guiding them like a teacher trying to help her students understand something deeper. "You followed the rules," she said. "But sometimes doing the right thing isn't just about the rules. It's about people. You have to see the person in front of you, not just the situation." One of the officers nodded slowly. The words sank in heavy with meaning. They had been so focused on procedure that they forgot about simple human understanding. "When you're out there," she continued, "you'll meet all kinds of people. Some will lie, some will fight, some will run, but others might just be scared, confused, or even innocent. You need to learn how to tell the difference. That's what makes a good officer great." The young officers listened quietly. Her voice was calm, but every word carried weight. They could feel the difference between being scolded and being taught. And what they felt now was something they would never forget. After a few minutes, she stood up. The two officers immediately rose as well. She smiled again, more warmly this time. "Don't let this moment define you," she said. "Let it teach you. Mistakes are part of this job. What matters is what you do after them." The chief returned and asked to speak with her privately. The young officers stepped outside, their hearts still pounding. The hallway seemed quieter now, but their minds were loud with thoughts. They had handcuffed their superior officer. How could they ever live that down? Yet somehow her calm attitude made it easier to breathe. Inside the room, the chief spoke quietly with her. He offered his personal apology, but she waved it off. "No harm done," she said. "They were just doing their duty. If anything, it shows we're training them to be careful. That's not a bad thing." The chief shook his head. "You're too kind, Captain. Most people wouldn't handle this so gracefully." She smiled. "Maybe not. But losing my temper wouldn't fix anything." They learned more from this than they would from any classroom lecture. After the meeting, she gathered her belongings. The young officers stood by the door, unsure if they should speak again. When she walked past them, she paused. "You two remind me of myself when I started," she said softly. "You care a lot. Just remember that caring also means thinking twice before acting." They both nodded, grateful that she wasn't angry. Her kindness made them respect her even more. That evening, the story spread quietly through the department. Some officers laughed nervously. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The two young officers avoided attention, keeping to themselves. But to everyone's surprise, Captain Hayes didn't try to hide what happened. In fact, she shared the story herself during the next team briefing. Standing in front of the entire department, she told the story just as it happened. Every detail, every mistake, and every lesson. She didn't blame anyone. She didn't try to embarrass the officers. Instead, she turned the event into a moment of reflection. "What happened last week was a misunderstanding," she began. "But it was also an opportunity. We talk a lot about protecting people, but sometimes protecting means listening before acting. It means understanding before judging. These two officers did what they thought was right, and that's important. But next time I hope they and all of us will take one more second to look a little closer." The room was silent. No one expected her to speak like that. Her words weren't about embarrassment, and they were about growth. The two officers sat at the back, humbled but grateful. They had made a mistake, but now that mistake was teaching everyone something valuable. After the meeting, several officers came up to her, thanking her for the way she handled the situation. Some said they would have reacted with anger if it had been them. She only smiled and said, "We all wear the same badge. Respect goes both ways." That day changed the way people saw her. Before, she was just a name coming into a new position, the new captain everyone was curious about. But after this, she was more than that. She was someone they could look up to, someone who understood what it meant to lead with heart. In the following days, the two officers found it hard to meet her gaze, still feeling guilty. But she made it easy. She treated them like any other colleagues, not like people who had made a big mistake. She even assigned them to help her on a small community project, saying, "You two have good instincts. Let's put them to use." They were surprised but grateful. Working alongside her, they saw a different side of leadership, one built on empathy, patience, and quiet strength. She didn't talk about the past again, and neither did they, but the lesson stayed with them. A few weeks later, one of the officers responded to a call about a suspicious person at a park. When he arrived, he found a nervous man sitting alone, looking lost. Instead of rushing in, he remembered her words, "See the person, not just the situation." He approached calmly, asked a few questions, and realized the man wasn't a threat at all. He was just a father who had lost his child in the crowd. The officer helped him, and when he got back to the station, he smiled quietly to himself. The lesson had worked. Sometimes mistakes lead to the best kind of growth. And for that department, that day in the mall was no longer a story of embarrassment. It was a story of learning, of understanding, and of what it means to truly serve and protect. Weeks had passed since the day the young officers had mistakenly handcuffed their captain. The memory still lingered, but it had transformed from embarrassment into a quiet lesson that shaped how they approached their work. Every call they responded to, every person they interacted with carried the weight of that experience. The story of that day had spread throughout the department, but it was no longer a tale of mistake or shame. It had become a story of understanding, patience, and leadership. The younger officer arrived early at the station one morning, sunlight streaming through the windows, casting long shadows on the floor. The captain was already there, reviewing reports. Her calm demeanor made the office feel less intimidating, more like a place of guidance than authority. She glanced up and smiled at him. "Morning. Ready for the day?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I feel like I've learned a lot these past weeks." "Good," she said. "But remember, learning never stops." The first call of the day was a routine one, a report of a stray dog wandering through a busy street. The officer had handled similar situations before, but this time he approached it with more patience. Instead of rushing, he followed her example, observing the dog's behavior, noting its fear and confusion. When she arrived, she guided him quietly, showing him how to calm the animal and lead it safely to a shelter. It was simple, but he could feel the difference in his approach. He was no longer just following rules. He was thinking, understanding, and acting with care. After returning the dog to the shelter, they drove back to the station in silence. The officer finally spoke. "I didn't realize how much patience matters until I saw you handle situations like that." She nodded, eyes on the road. People in situations are not always what they seem. A good officer knows when to step forward and when to step back. Judgment is everything. The next call was more serious. A neighbor had reported loud arguments in an apartment building. When they arrived, the officers saw a man and a woman in the hallway. The woman appeared frightened while the man seemed agitated. The younger officer felt a familiar tension rise in his chest, memories of the mall incident flashing in his mind. He remembered the captain's advice, see the person, not just the situation. He approached slowly, keeping his voice calm. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked the man. The man paused, looking surprised at the officer's gentle tone. "We had an argument, that's all," he muttered. The captain moved closer to the woman, asking softly, "Are you safe? Do you need help?" She nodded. "I just want to leave for a while," she whispered. The captain arranged for the woman to stay with a friend and spoke with the man calmly, explaining the importance of controlling anger and seeking help. It was a quiet resolution, but it left a strong impression on the younger officer. He realized that real strength wasn't in force or authority. It was in understanding, listening, and guiding. Over the next few weeks, the officer continued to ride with the captain, learning from her every move. They responded to a variety of calls: lost children, minor accidents, people in distress, and each time the captain showed him how to approach situations with calmness and care. He noticed how she treated every person as a human being first, not a problem or a statistic. The lesson went deeper than policing. It was about empathy, patience, and judgment in life. One day they received a call about an elderly man who had fallen in his apartment and couldn't get up. The officer rushed to the scene, but the captain stopped him. "Slow down," she said. "We need to assess carefully before we act." Inside the apartment, the man lay on the floor, confused and frightened. The officer would have panicked, but under her guidance, he learned to speak calmly, reassure the man, and check for injuries before moving him. They managed to lift him safely onto a chair and called for medical assistance. The man thanked them repeatedly, tears in his eyes, and the officer felt a surge of pride, not from authority, but from helping someone in need. It was during moments like these that he truly understood the captain's lessons. The handcuffing incident was no longer a source of shame. Instead, it was a pivotal moment that taught him humility, patience, and how to think critically before taking action.